What if the very routines that you resist could be the things that unlock your ability to reach your potential and set yourself free? And how can establishing the right habits help us to create that freedom? Having to do anything in a systematic way can have a way of feeling a little bit restrictive, but making that personal agreement, that commitment to sticking with doing things that are constructive provides you with the structure and the discipline needed to accomplish those really tough things that you have in front of you. Bottom line is, habits define whatever it is that you become. And that's regardless if they're the habits that you conscientiously choose and you effort yourself to establish, or if it's a habit of disorganization and never making a habit. So it's up to you, the hard way or the easy way. And it's sort of funny sometimes when you think about it. Something that we need to put the effort into establishing, like making a habit, ends up being the thing that makes all of the doing less difficult than the brutal difficulty of living through an effort that is absolutely disorganized and rudderless. Brutal. So like I said, it's the easy way or the hard way. Are you matured enough up to recognize the difference and apply the best strategy for yourself? Because these habits, or these lack of habits, they will define who you become. They certainly are defining who you are now. So it is up to you to take the responsibility to consciously manage them. If you don't know, my name is Chad, and I'm working my way towards writing 100 songs, sort of my way of meeting myself. In addition to that, I'm working towards building my channel to help me promote all that. I do these daily talks as equal parts being helpful and being reflective in order for me to be able to take account of my own shortcomings. As it stands today, I'm about 1 year into the effort after having released my first song. And while I'm still struggling to figure out exactly how you go about doing what I'm doing, I learned a lot about what you should try to avoid. So in this past year, I spent a lot of time approaching things with trial and error, and at the onset that makes a lot of sense. You're just going to have to work in that way, see what works, make adjustments. When you finally do get to smooth sailing, then part of the effort in making the transition out of obscurity into realizing what it is that you're trying to do, it really does rely on you have coming to be resolved to your task and resolved to yourself and what you're doing. And what I've taken away in my own experience this past year is that the more I face challenges and face difficulties, and the more I take into account all the things that actually need to be addressed going into this pursuit and working towards it, the better I'm able to understand how to make systems inside of it. That said, I do think it is fair that at the onset of a task, you may not have a grasp of what can be implemented as a habit to make the whole thing go. So in hindsight, which is always 2020, my advice would be to think about habits that are useful, that relate to the showing up of it, at least at the beginning. And that would include things like blocking time for yourself in a regular way, where the first habit that you implement has to do with building a regular routine of showing up in order to have time to really flesh out the ins and outs of whatever it is that you're trying to do. Then as you progress and you start to know what those things are, you can work on sort of a 2.0 version where you niche down on each of those, really define what they are, and start to block out all of the areas that need attending and make a real system of it. Just start where you're at. That's really the point where I am now. I've spent a year trying to assess all of the things that might go into this and testing the waters in a number of ways. And I've taken classes and sought out help. I've focused on all kinds of different content that I could create, try to narrow in on what I would be able to do and implement for myself, figuring out what I could do consistently and be able to be responsible for. So maybe the best way that you can get started with this is to take a look at the areas of your life that might seem to be overly chaotic and could stand to benefit from having a little bit more structure and habit built into them. Once you do start looking at this regularly, when you do start finding areas where you can begin to apply regularity, that consistent action over time will start to shape your identity. And that's a big help in that regularity is calibrated in towards your long-term vision. There's a sort of seamlessness that begins to show itself when you do start building this into your life and how it relates to your progress and your growth in the areas that you're working to. Now, you may be saying to yourself, all of this is said and good, but the brass tacks, sticking to habits isn't easy. And you're right, it's not easy to stick to things. especially if we're using the idea of creating a habit to prop up in place of doing something that we haven't any intention of doing. In that case, you're spot on right, because resistance comes from having unrealistic expectations, or comes from the lack of immediate results, or from focusing on the outcomes instead of the process. Persistence in its nature is habitual. So do yourself a favor and create habits that are sensible and that align with what it is you're trying to do. And by doing things that are realistic, you reduce your exposure to undue failures. You know, getting in a habit of making habits is just like anything else. It's like riding a bike for the first time. You have no idea what to make a balance and you're all wobbly. In due time, you're making hay. I've never been accused of being the sharpest tool in the shed, so you should take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. But the strategy that I've been using that's working for me is something like overpromise and underdeliver. I know that sounds insane, counterintuitive, backwards even, and it makes perfect sense that you're thinking just that. But let me explain. This whole making habits thing is one of my areas of weakness, and I suppose that's why I have this real backwards way to making it work out for me. I always gave myself too much freedom with the idea of being a creative person, too much liberty to take whatever time or use any method that I could to try to generate an idea and to work it through. And maybe there's a little bit something to that, you know, in terms of exploration of inspiration, you know, but when it gets down to the brass tacks of doing, that way of doing things doesn't really align with progress. And so while I've allowed myself a pretty ingrained habit of living in a sort of a freedom of flow state, breaking that is a little bit disjointing. So that gets back to the overpromise and underdeliver. I sort of mean it as a metaphor or parallel to casting a wide net. You know, there's so many things that I need to adapt into my daily routine. There's things that I don't even know that I need to be doing that I'll need to incorporate in as I figure that out. So the idea of overpromise for me is sort of a metaphor for casting a wide net. I mean, if you're historically not good at doing something, then you're well served to lean into celebrating the parts of the doing that you're able to and building as you go. And that's what I mean by underdeliver. Knowing that I'm not going to be able to manage myself at 100% right from the gate. I go into it at terms that I'm going to have to just carry what I can. It doesn't stop me from throwing a wide net and seeing how much of it I can't manage. And in that way, I can look at everything that I tried to do and to see what of that I had a propensity to manage, and then take a deeper dive on those areas and focus in on turning those onto autopilot. Then I take a look at the areas where I fell short, and then from there I spend time considering how I might better approach managing those aspects. In my perspective, it's sort of like that saying, a rising tide will lift all ships. So I'm out there overpromising, throwing that wide net, doing my best to try to manage as much of it as I can, crossing a certain amount of time where I'm able to take a look back and assess what worked and what didn't. The areas where I did drop the ball, you know, that were harder for me to make routine, because the rising tide lifts all ships. And that's what you and I are here. We're the rising tide. We're the lifting ships. So find something today that you can start to make a routine of doing that lends you to being more strategic and lends you to being more purposeful in your effort. And rather than letting life happen to you, get going and start making some progress. You can start by focusing on small steps. Start with a habit that is so small, it feels like it's impossible to fail. The next thing that can help you is to anchor what you're trying to do to existing habits. Pair a new habit with something that you're doing regularly. That could be your morning coffee with your journal and making time for a little bit of brainstorming. Track your progress. Use some kind of a habit tracker where you stay aware of the result of your effort. That way you can celebrate it and feel encouraged by your progress. Taking the momentum from that into the next step. Remember, this is all about intention and persistence. You can apply those over time. They'll provide you with the freedom that you are looking for to realize what it is that you're trying to. Remember, it's like planting the seeds, and it's the consistent care that allows those plants to grow. So choose one thing and get to that. And in the meantime, if you haven't heard my new song, you can listen to it here. You keep your head up, and I'm going to keep mine up. We'll talk again soon.